Michelle Rempel Garner is a Member of Parliament for Calgary No Sale. She was first elected to the House of Commons in 2011 and re-elected in 2015. Michelle is currently serving as the Shadow Minister of Health. Michelle has held the positions of Minister of State for Western Economic Diversification, Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of the Environment, Shadow Minister for Industry and Economic Development, Shadow Minister for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, and was the Vice Chair of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. Michelle was twice named Maclean's Magazine's Parliamentarian of the Year, Rising Star, calling her one of the government's most impressive performers. In 2016, Michelle was also named to the Forum of Young Global Leaders, an integral part of the World Economic Forum. Prior to entering politics, she was named one of Canada's top 100 most powerful women by the Women's Executive Network. Michelle holds a degree in economics and has a strong history of volunteerism in Calgary. She has led significant legislative efforts as a prolific public speaker, social media expert, and has been published in national newspapers. A huge round of applause. Before I pass the mic over, I'm going to invite the rest of the panel to come and join us up on stage. And I'm going to pass the microphone over.
Thanks so much. Well, welcome everyone. And thank you for the warm and long welcome. It's one of those moments where I need to edit the bio. Right now, my interest in this group started actually a few years ago, but right now I have a piece of legislation in front of the House of Commons, and it's the first piece of legislation to even start talking about a framework for growth in the Web3 sector in Canada. How do we do that? How do we even approach the conversation? And it's been really interesting to experience this, to sort of cut this path in the snow. And we've got two foremost experts in what I would say the dreaded word regulation in the sector, and I'm hoping we can have a really frank conversation today about the regulatory environment, some of the recent developments in the space, your thoughts on it. But first, I will read your very long bios. So Dean, President of Bitbuy, well done. You're the former Head of Finance and Compliance for the FLC. That sounds really romantic and exciting. And is currently the head of exchanges at WonderFi and president at Bitbuy. And since joining Bitbuy in 2018, you've led all the finance, compliance, and regulatory strategy development and implementation and growth initiatives, including all M&A transactions. And the juicy part, your key milestones, include completing Canada's first proof of reserve and solvency report, structuring insured Bitcoin holdings one-to-one, and growing cumulative transaction volumes on the platform from 25 million in 2018 to over 3 billion in 2021. That's a little marginal, Dean. I think, work harder next time. I'm just kidding. Bilal, you and I have had the opportunity to chat on a few occasions as well. Bilal's the President and Chief Executive Officer of NDAX. Longstanding Canadian tech entrepreneur. Thanks for seeing it through and staying here in Canada, and a crypto industry leader and a CEO and founder of NDAX. You spearhead pioneering the crypto industry daily with over a decade of experience in finance, engineering, digital assets, and blockchain. And I've learned a lot from both of you. There's this very technical title for the panel today, but I think really what we're getting at is the overall regulatory environment in our country. And maybe we'll start, if you'll indulge me, as a question I'll direct to you as a legislator. Maybe what are your thoughts overall on the regulatory environment in Canada? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? And where should we be going and why? We'll start with you, Dean, and hand it over. And I think you've each got a mic here, yeah?
Yep, that works.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
No, I think Canada's done a really good job so far as a starting point with respect to regulation for crypto trading platforms specifically, which we both operate. We may disagree on how right they got it the first time, but I think we'll agree that it was never going to be perfect, from day one. And so, when I look across the different jurisdictions in the world, I don't see too many examples of clear frameworks around crypto trading platforms and how they can conduct trade in a safe and compliant manner, and which protects users and keeps the activity in Canada. Where I think there could be potential improvement is just to really understand and appreciate the pace of this industry and how quickly things develop within it, And it's amazing that we have this framework around spot trading, which I think is sort of the majority of what's covered within the model we work under. But with the emergence of staking, DeFi, NFTs, and other sort of use cases around crypto and stable coins as well, I think I'd like to see a bit of an understanding of how competitive it is and sort of the impact on regulating a certain component of the industry and not others, and more so around that clients in Canada, despite the fact that they can't take advantage of these offerings in Canada, are still accessing them globally. And so what that brings is undue risk to Canadian residents that will participate in this activity with or without a framework in Canada. And so when those assets leave the country, it's hard to have oversight or any recourse in the event that things go wrong, which, I said it earlier in the week, when things go wrong in crypto, they tend to go really wrong. And if you look at examples like Celsius and Voyager, again, that's an example of where had that, sort of line of business been regulated in Canada, there would have been a possibility to protect some Canadians that were negatively impacted by both of those platforms.
I think those are really valid points. Bilal, do you agree or have anything to add on that?
Yeah, definitely. First, I like to make a disclosure. I'm not a regulatory expert by no means. I'm a business owner, and
I think that makes you a regulatory expert just by default. So
just to make things clear. But I do agree with Dean on most points he made. Regulations in general for a brand new industry typically means the regulators want to protect investors. They want to maintain the reputation that the Canadian industry have, and with that, it can be rigid, and it can bring a lot of friction to the different. You can't regulate something that's still evolving, right? So, and with that, we've seen that in the past 2 years, a lot of things happening where we've seen some trading platforms where got into it and they became part of the regulatory sandbox. We've seen others like Index where we decided to take the longer route and work with the regulators at all fronts to better come out with a framework that meets and fits our business model and makes sure we're not jeopardizing our business model and that of our clients. And then you've got, some other players that, they're too big to care essentially. And then, they're outside the framework now.
I want to key in on a couple of things that you said and ask a question on it, but I'm actually going to look at Kalea because I'm a politician with a microphone, which is a problem. Could you give me a 5-minute heads up towards the end, just because there's no, when you want me to wrap it up sort of thing? Great. Awesome. Otherwise, we'll be here for 5 hours and nobody wants that. So, I kind of have this moment, I think the audience did too, where you said, well, I'm a business owner. I'm not a regulatory expert. And you also talked about how this is a space that's emerging. And I think, you also mentioned that if I took a nugget out of what you just said, that I think you were questioning government's capacity to keep up with the market because it is so innovative. And I think that's, those are two really apt observations, because regulators should be working with the industry to figure out how to put a framework in place that creates certainty, that creates stability, that creates, as you said, Dean, protections for consumers, but also that it's not happening to you, right? And it's happening with you and designed by. Do you think across levels of government, and especially, particularly because regs are happening, at both at the federal and provincial levels, do you think Canada has the capacity to do this? Is it a competitive advantage? And if not, are there things that we should be looking at to fix in order for us to not lose any sort of advantage that we might have right now? Either of you.
Yes, so that's a great point. I always think about that because the regulators essentially they're in a very tough spot. You've seen two of the biggest platforms in Canada in 2017 and 2018, crumble taking down, 280 million back then when Bitcoin was, less than $2,000, in value. So it kind of hand-tied the regulators to come in strong versus what we've seen in the States where they came up with a framework where you have 5 years that the regulators can work with industry participant and figure out what's really happening. And due to the unique nature of the Canadian regulatory framework, where you've got a traditional finance, and then there's a very well established framework there, instead of coming in with trying to understand the crypto and the innovation of what's really happening within, and trying to come up with a framework specific to that. I think the regulators were hand tied to take an already existent framework and trying to see how we can fit something new into it. And that's where a lot of the platforms got stuck in it. And we're seeing some call it jurisdiction arbitrage, where some regulators are okay with investment limits, for instance, some are not okay with it, and some other factors.
I think both of us as business owners would always like to say, or I'll say it, that regulators could do more, but it's obviously a balance, understanding where we fit within the general priorities that they may have at any one point. And so to expect them to dedicate all of their time and effort towards cryptocurrency is probably not realistic. But I think we could probably be more agile going forward, in the sense that there are companies like ours that are regulated. Within that includes the onus to conduct suitability assessments. So at this point in time, we can clearly differentiate our clients from, a purely retail client versus someone that is an accredited investor. And, I think what I'd like to see is like more of a, sandbox type environment for companies like ours, where, we could test new product and new innovation. And maybe it's not with accredited investors at the onset, but potentially with a subset of employees or even regulators testing it in a sandbox environment. But what I think would be an interesting approach would be to go through a sandbox environment with some of this this new technology and new product offerings, with a view to potentially offering it to accredited investors, building up that trust and that continuity with reporting and policies and procedures and internal controls, and then maybe from there one day rolling out something to the full suite of clients. But I guess in summary, I think maybe a more agile approach here, could be beneficial. Because like I said, I think a lot of this activity is happening whether or not we offer it in Canada or not. And so I think we just have to be more mindful of how we can get there quicker.
Is there anyone in the world or any jurisdiction that's doing that right now in some way, shape, or form? And how is it going?
No. So it's like, to Bilal's point, there's a lot of arbitrage between jurisdictions and what you're able to and what you're not able to do. I think the biggest thing in Canada is that there's a clear framework around spot trading.
Okay.
And, sort of accepting that as, a Bitbuy or Coinberry comes with limitations around margin trading and other stuff, which may seem obvious today, to protect clients. But like I said, there are gray markets where clients can access this type of activity regardless, and are probably doing so. So I think, just the more agile way to test new product and innovation would probably serve the market going forward. So,
just before we get into some of the technical aspects of what is happening right now and your reaction to it, you're sort of on this note of like a test sandbox. And then Bilal, you were talking about what I think is really apt, that I think, current regulators are trying to put the asset class, if you will, into a framework that it doesn't necessarily, the analogy I used in the House of Commons was it's like trying to play a MP4 on a cassette player sometimes. But do you think that there is some low-hanging fruit for like a like equals like regulatory model that could provide some, really quick either consumer protections or investor protections, as the case may be, that would show some wins for regulators that wouldn't be too technical, or that could be sort of, ported or shown to use, that this model that you're talking about, Dean, could work in a way that like doesn't scare regulators, right? Because new and innovative and fast doesn't necessarily equal like a regulator, right? So how could you, I guess what I'm asking is how could you implement something like that? And how could you also use, are there ways that we could use the existing frameworks right now that aren't being utilized to get some quick wins?
Yeah, I think there's parallels for sure, but I find it hard to believe that any existing framework would capture sort of all the nuance of crypto because it is such a new technology and the pace of its development is quite rapid. I think to Bilal's point, the framework in place for crypto trading platforms is largely trying to accomplish that, whereby we're slapping on a lot of what looks, a lot of what exists in traditional finance into this, exchange or brokerage model on the crypto side. And we could probably argue on the varying degrees of success that that's accomplished, but to me, it's a really good starting point. And I just like to see, sort of like the view of continuing to evolve what that entails going forward, just be made a bit more present.
Yeah, definitely. Like from my point, I agree with Dean there that we need some type of a balance. We need to relax the restrictions a little bit. I don't disagree with holding entities, businesses to a higher standard, requesting, more reporting from those entities, working really closely with the regulators in terms of reporting, in terms of financials, in terms of policies and procedures and protocols that's put in place to protect investors. But at the same time, you need that balance where you can experiment with a new product, new innovation that we're seeing being very successful overseas. You see some of the bigger exchanges doing, NFTs. We're too scared to even bring it up, right? And some other products, right? So having that play field that you can work and report and interact back and forth with the regulators, and the regulators using you as a partner, expecting certain requirements from you, and it could be a foundation, but allowing us to be able to, experiment with new things within certain limits, of course.
Do you think the regulators understand that? Like, is that an advocacy position that you're getting traction with?
I think some do, some don't. Depends on what what the business.
Chuckle there. We're gonna.
I think some do, some don't, and it's a pretty challenge to to make everybody agree to the same thing. But it's priorities at the end of the day, right?
Dean.
Yeah, I agree. It's all about priorities, and for us to expect that crypto is the top priority at any regulatory body today is probably a stretch. And I think it's very difficult within Canada the way it's set up, where a company like ours goes to the OSC and then to the CSA. A company like Bilal's goes to the ASC and then to the CSA. There are a lot of opinions and differing views within all of that process, and I think the net result, truthfully, is just things lag, which is to be expected in many ways. But again, to my point, like, as this industry is very fast paced, and as companies like ours are competing, internationally with players that are, in gray markets and able to service Canadians in some way, I think it's important to just promote the growth of these platforms, which includes new verticals. And to Bilal's point, like, I think like, we're more than willing to demonstrate why we think we are like proper or sophisticated operators with the ability to offer these products to clients in a very compliant and safe and secure way. And so having that ability to demonstrate it and having the willingness to pursue new verticals, I think will go a long way to keeping a lot of this activity in Canada, which I think is sort of the onus of the regulatory position here, right? Like, how do we provide security and safety for Canadians and keep this activity within Canada?
I think that the latter part of that statement is so important to particularly because I don't think it benefits anyone to have the discussion around this politicized, right? So, having the industry come out and have that as a stated objective, I think will go a long way too. But you're sort of bridging into what has been happening in the country. So recently, both the CSA and the OSC, we've talked about this a little bit already. They've put out guidance regarding a proposed framework to regulate trading platforms. So it's been a while since that's come out now. And there has been some response to this, and there's been differing responses. So what approaches have Canadian companies taken in response to the framework? What do you think? How are you reacting to it within your lines of work? And just any other commentary you might have, advice, observations on the approach. I think there's
here's where we're
I'm
going
interested
to disagree.
Yes, right.
I think
It's like, Bilal, your voice is lulling me to sleep. Like, I expect the constellations to come out here. So spice it up.
I'm trying to be the nice guy. Everybody, probably around here knows that, since day one, when we started Index and the way we carried ourselves, building the product, the platform, we built our customers first, and we built our reputation based off of that. When you look at that and you start seeing, the guidance essentially that came out, we did not necessarily agree with all of it. We agreed with most of it. So things around investor protection, we were, all for it. Some other things that we did not agree with around, custody, around investment limits, especially for our business model. We offer an order book, so essentially liquidity is a pretty critical component. Our personas or target audience or target clients are more sophisticated traders that like to trade back and forth. So we did not necessarily agree with everything that guidance notice had. And fortunately, we've been in contact with the regulators since, first day of operation. Been in constant dialogue with them, communicating to them what our plans, what we're doing, how we're, what's the next steps that we will be, taking. And with that, we saw the guidance come out. The guidance is simply, you can think about it as a regulatory sandbox, because it kind of put you in this restricted dealer, maybe too technical, but it put you in this restricted dealer category, with the understanding that within 2 years you have to transition to become a full member with IROC. And for us, in order, speaking back and forth with our legal counsel, we found that it's probably the best approach for us to get our message across is to continue work with the regulators and to work with IROC directly to potentially get there. So that's, one of the main, some of the players, sure. Not many players are there that did that. And then you've got other players that, I call them the early adopters. They have a certain business model that fit, exactly what that sandbox asked for. Maybe Dean can speak more to it if there was any consequences to agreeing to that. But from our end, we think that, we're happy for those guys, and, we're, us and restricted dealers, the ones that taken the IROC route and the restricted dealer route are on the right track, I believe, to get Canada to a place where we're recognized on an international level as leaders in the space, and bring trust and, essentially bring more investment to the Canadian industry as well as the framework, matures.
Yeah, so we obviously took a different approach and, just went head first into getting regulated, whatever that meant at the time. And, for us, obviously there were, discussions similar to Bilal on different approaches. And, at the time we just decided that, this is a good starting point for the industry as a whole to have a clear framework around the trading of crypto assets in Canada. And, we wanted to support that as leaders in the space. And so for us, it was important to just move full steam ahead and really work with the regulators to fit our business model into it. Now, in hindsight, the fact that Bilal doesn't have investment limits and I do, I mean, we could probably spend an hour on that alone. I don't know if I had the full visibility at the time that there were two approaches that were on the table. But yeah, that being said, I mean, like for us, I think as an industry, it's allowed the industry to really stabilize and mature. I see a lot of the platforms that have gone through the process now, have significant undertakings that they didn't have, previously. And I think that's, a huge boost for the industry and sort of the maturation of these companies. For us, the decision was a little bit different in the sense of, prior to this framework getting put out, we were, pursuing various M&A opportunities, financing opportunities. And, at the time there was a bit of a, onus on us to really get this license before we could pursue any of those opportunities. And so I think, in many ways, investment limits, we'll live with them for the time being. But what it has allowed us to do is pursue M&A. And so Bitbuy was sold to WonderFi in March of this year. And thereafter, purchased Coinberry, which is another licensed or registered crypto trading platform. So, for us, the consolidation story and the M&A component to sort of growing our business was important. And that was, part of the, thought process for us is like, really to be able to pursue a lot of that activity. We felt we needed to be licensed and in good standing with the regulators. And so we took a different approach and, here we are.
So, I mean, just if I may, just a quick follow-up on the investment limit item. Do you think it was too blunt an instrument to get to what the regulator wanted to do? And if yes, what's the alternative?
I think so. I think it was a bit heavy-handed, and I think at the time it might have called for it because we were starting from a position where there was no oversight. But to me, like the thing that just sticks out more than anything is this unlimited ability to buy or sell 4 assets, and then these restrictions on everything thereafter. I don't think anyone in this room would disagree with Bitcoin and Ethereum being part of the 4, but when you get to Bitcoin Cash and Litecoin, I don't think anyone here holds either, if I had to just guess. And, it's borderline irresponsible.
What if I said I did? I'm kidding, I don't.
We'd have to have someone else moderate the rest of the panel. Sorry. But yeah, I mean, like, look, to me, that is borderline irresponsible. And, I think at the very least, those limits, again, to my point earlier about like, how can we just sort of evaluate what works and what doesn't, and how can we sort of build for what's to come with respect to all of the development in the industry. I'd love to see, those limits and certainly the no limit on Bitcoin Cash and Litecoin revisited, and, happy to provide insight to regulators as to why if needed.
So you politicianed a little bit because I asked, like, what would the alternative be to get to the end result of the reg, which I'm assuming, just to be, just to sum it up, is more investment protection, right? And more.
I'm all in favor of investment protection. I would just, look to, traditional finance as an indicator of what may work or what may not. Are there limits on certain stocks? Are there limits on, or no limits on other stocks? If the answer is no, then why is it different in crypto? Because, it's a younger industry or asset class, but largely trades in similar way to equities. And so I would probably ask for a reason why it would be dissimilar than equities if I was having a conversation today. But if it's
I'd speculate. I'm not sure that, and again, I'm by no means the expert you are on this, but how do we prevent, sort of bank run type activity or pump and dump type activity in the market right now, which are heavily regulated in traditional financial industries, right?
Yeah,
and
well,
like GameStop.
So, yeah, I'll stop.
Bed Bath and Beyond.
Yeah.
Like GameStop, eh?
Yeah.
No, I think it goes back to the original point when we first started about the framework itself. There's different business models, right? So when you're trying to regulate a broker who's, the business is pretty clear. You're coming, you're buying Bitcoin, or you want to buy Shiba coin or Dogecoin or whatever you want, or you've got, trading platforms and exchanges and order books and whatnot that also carries the same type of, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, kind of similar approach. Because when stocks, you're trading from 8 to 4, everybody's trading to same order book and whatnot. Similar with that, with the crypto industry. When you're listing a coin, you're not just singling out one single coin and list it. That the platform is held to a higher standard, as we mentioned. So you have to do disclosures, you have to do due diligence on the coin and the listing criteria and all that kind of stuff. And obviously, liquidity and volume plays a big role and reduce that risk of a pump and dump. Now, some people, in the audience would come to me, it's like, oh, why you're offering Dogecoin on the platform, but not Bitcoin, why Dogecoin, for instance, right? And then that's exactly why we offer those services and this platform. We do our due diligence, making sure, with full disclosure that those assets are, highly tradable, there's high liquidity on them, but it's not my job to decide on someone else if they want to buy Cardano versus Bitcoin, right? It's their kind of decision, as long as we make sure any coins we list on our platform are something that we're comfortable with, that, it's not gonna put us at risk of, regulatory risk or any other business risk.
Yeah, and I know I've just got the 5-minute warning, and there's actually 3 other points that we wanted to hit on today, and I'll go through them really quickly on a sort of a rapid fire thing here. But I'll add this into it. I think you're right. Like, I think the reputational integrity of a platform says a lot in terms of investment. But then there's also, like, I can't believe I'm sitting on this side of the table now on this, but it's also, what is the role of government and the responsibility of government to an investor in terms of intervention there, right? And I think that that's the space that hasn't been defined yet. And I think that's maybe where the regulators and legislators are sitting now too, is saying, I think the public is more aware of some of the issues. And so it's really, where is that nexus, right? But
yeah, I think we're both under, we both have an onus to criticize or diligence any token that we list. And I think from there, once it's past that process, it's maybe a bit overreaching to then impose limits on certain coins and not others. But I just think it's sort of, it needs to evolve from that perspective. And I just think it's about, like, sort of the communication piece and really just understanding what works and what doesn't, and being able to just kind of step back and say, okay, a year later, Bitbuy, Coinberry, what are you seeing? What's working? What isn't? And have the same conversations with guys like Bilal that are still going through the process on what they think will work or not work based on the continued evolution of their business.
so just as we're starting to wind up here, just a few quick questions. You can answer any or none of the above. So we do have in our country a lot of diverse types of businesses that deal in cryptocurrency, as we've already sort of gone through today. So one of the questions was, based on your understanding, what's the path to pursuing a restricted dealer license or IROC registrations for different types of businesses? What are some of the benefits and challenges of obtaining full licensed security dealer status in Canada? And then to some of the points you were making earlier, Dean, around sandboxes, I know that there's the Alberta Financial Innovation Sandbox that's been rolled out. Has that been effective? Do you suggest any changes? So if you just want to comment on any of those issues, and then we can just quickly wrap it up afterwards too. Oh, well, am I allowed? I can ask audience questions? I thought I had 3 minutes left. Oh, okay. So those questions are on the floor, and I should put it to the floor to ask questions? Yes. Okay. Who has a question?
Hey Michelle, Flo here with Crypto News Canada. I interviewed you 2 months ago at the Futurist conference. Nice to see you again. Compliment on the woke comment in Parliament. That was pretty awesome. I mean it. the question isn't exactly about regulation, but more, you have a unique vantage point and hopefully the ear of the federal government. And I'm wondering how you feel about the receptiveness of the federal government to the crypto market today at the end of 2022. And if you feel like in the coming years, we are going to see the kind of steps, legislation, regulation, that are going to position us more favorably than we are now. Because from having done 7 interviews today, everyone's saying that we're behind the US at the very least.
Question to me? Or to
Yeah,
you?
for sure, to you. Well,
I'll be brief. My biggest concern in response to your question is that the questions of regulating the industry becomes very it becomes politicized. And I think that that would be the absolute worst thing to happen to the Web3 space writ large because of the potential opportunity that it has for economic growth in the country. The political differences on regs should be informed by input from industry and from investors. The question of the viability and the importance of the industry to the economic growth in the country should not be something that is politicized. And that's what I'm worried about right now. And that's what I'm on a macro level worried is going to put Canada behind the US and other jurisdictions that are approaching it from that perspective. I have seen that certainly happen over the last 2 to 3 months specifically. The goal of my bill was to avoid that situation by saying, if at the federal level we were going to create a framework, number one, the principle should be that it's industry driven. And number two, that it should be approached from the perspective of understanding that this is the growth of this market is a good thing for the country, while ensuring that the best mechanisms are in place for both investor protection, investor certainty, as well as consumer protection. I think we've hit a bit of a snag there, to be very blunt. I'm very worried about this, and my biggest piece of advice to anybody who's listening today, who's doing advocacy in this space, is get in front of legislators, particularly at the federal level, and say, look, you can disagree on policy around regs. You should not be disagreeing on the viability and the importance of this industry to the country as a whole. And I'll just close by saying, we were having a chat as we were walking up the windy stairs in these heels I haven't worn in 3 years, but legislators will always say, we want economic diversification, we want economic growth in Canada, we want to move away from natural resources to a digital economy, blah, 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 buzzword. Well, here it is. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, it might be the devil. And I just, it can't be that. Like, I want to rant, you talked about a rant I had this week. I want to have that rant, but I just know with me as a partisan, that's not helpful. So it's really up to the industry to say, look at the jobs that these two respective guys have created, right? Never mind the rest of you in the room. These are exactly what we need. And the point that you just made on, us falling behind other jurisdictions, that has to be hammered home. We're staring down the barrel of a recession in this country. This industry is creating growth. Does it have some challenges around consumer protection, consumer confidence? Sure. But those are things that can be overcome, right? Through discussions like this. But we're just at an inflection point right now, and I can't underscore that enough. I don't know if either of you want to add to that.
No, that was well said.
Do we have time for one more? Okay. Oh, I didn't know. I'm so out of it. I just came back from Rwanda, so I don't even know what time zone I'm in right now. I'm really sorry. Yeah, awesome, thanks.
Would you continue that train of thought about how to get things done at the federal government level? So
I'm going to get it to you guys from a business perspective after you finish.
There's conversation in the industry right now about individual advocacy, not sectoral advocacy. So being that we're in Calgary, being that we're in the heart of oil country here, the oil and gas industry, the energy industry faced many similar challenges in the past. And it was not until industry came together and brought forth a package of standards and said, this is what we believe is the best practices for the industry, that things got done and there was an accepted standard. So I'd really like if you could talk about getting things done in government, both from an opposition and from a government side, but then let our panelists talk about the need for industry to coalesce around what is the ask of government, rather than putting it on the regulators to come up with regulations sort of in a vacuum.
I'm happy to answer that, but I certainly want to give you guys a chance to say anything that you might want to. It's a great question. Maybe what your experience has been on advocacy, what's working and what's not. Because I think hearing from industry is really important. Then I can give you my political 2 cents.
Yeah, no, I think from my end, we went over that earlier. I think the need for that is quite a bit. We've seen it with open banking and open finance, and we've seen how far it's taken. And I think Simple just got approved with Payments Canada yesterday after a long battle of working with the regulators, working with the financial authorities and whatnot. And I think similarly, we're going to see the same thing here in Canada. There's a constant dialogue between pretty much all the Canadian platforms right now. Myself and Dean and pretty much every other Canadian platform has been working very closely to see how we can make it a little bit easier with all the data that we have, that we can, internally come up with some type of suggestions and framework, because I completely agree with you. We cannot leave everything back to the regulators. We run the day-to-day business, and we know what works and what doesn't work and what we really need to get done, and what's some of the things that are very crucial for our business operations and whatnot.
Do you want anything, Dean?
Yeah, I would just agree. I think the onus is on the industry itself, participants that are actively involved with, certainly like ours. And, if we sit around waiting for the CSA to put a framework together around staking, we might be waiting a long time, truthfully. And so it really is like on us to demonstrate how staking, as an example, can be done in a compliant, safe manner, and, with, certain respect to like the policies, procedures, internal controls, like go through all the diligence with respect to that. But it's on us to demonstrate how that can work and fit within the framework. And, I think that will be truthfully the most effective way, rather than waiting for the politicians to come around to like the true potential of this technology, the same way the industry already seemingly has.
Yeah, and I'm just picking up on that. I mean, like the toothpaste is out of the tube, right? I mean, there's a lot of investment, there's a lot of growth. And I think that, just starting out by pointing that out, like this is not, like if the government's objective is to kill the industry, which is frankly, I'm not sure. Like I'm just gonna be really blunt. The narrative around crypto in Ottawa over the last 6 weeks, and I won't get into the politics behind it because you all understand what the politics are behind it. It's just ridiculous. It's just so disappointing. So rather than sort of falling into litigating that, this is what I would advise. So here's my free government relations advice to the industry. I think the comparison to the oil and gas sector is really apt, and it's certainly what has been on my heart from where not to go in the first instance, right? So the oil and gas sector, run by a bunch of really awesome engineers. Engineers are not government relations PR experts, right? We've got a bunch of finance, industry, wonderful people in this room. I'm an economist by training. We're not necessarily, I'm not an extrovert by nature. I've had to learn how to communicate to the public after doing, technical work for a long period of time first. It's understanding that the value proposition of this industry might not be understood by the public in a colloquial, meaningful way. And that's what happened with the oil sands, right? Oil sands, everybody just thought, well, we pay for hospitals and roads across the country. We've got energy security. Who doesn't know that? Well, basically the entire country didn't, because the NGOs came in and use that communications vacuum to paint the industry as something bad and detrimental to the country. And it took a long time, to your point, for the industry to come back and say, here's our value proposition to the country. And frankly, I only think it's been in the last 6 months where we've seen, fuel prices and fuel security as a determinant of, kinetic war really start to show how important the sector is. And we don't want to go through that. I'd rather that we skip that with this sector, right? So step one is defining the value proposition of the industry in a way that, like, the average person who has no touch base with anything related to Web3 can understand. And it creates jobs, right? Creates jobs, it creates economic growth, creates stability for the country. That's number one. Number two is translating that to politicians to understand that this is something that the public wants to see happen, particularly during a recession, right? Jobs. I mean, I'm not going to say anything that the finance minister said today. I encourage you to read. There was an article on CBC where Chrystia Freeland gave a very dismal picture of the Canadian economy that was frankly shocking coming. Now I'm getting partisan. I won't do that. But the bottom line being that this is what you're doing is something that can help the economy get through what we're likely about to see, right? And educating that fundamental point to people like me from all political parties. And then just to close, having like a key set of advocacy positions that maybe not like they're not down to granular technical detail that every person in this room is going to agree on everything. But that's where industry associations like CBC, right, is actually doing a lot of value add. And we're starting to see that, the lobbying becoming more coordinated. A rule in politics is if you've said something 100 million times and people are starting to complain about you repeating something, that's they've only started listening, right? And that's really what this industry does. So if we're just repeating technical things that the average person doesn't understand, then the industry will get painted in the same way that the oil signs did and have only just recovered from recently. To close on a positive note, though, that's really what the heart and spirit of my bill was supposed to do. And I have had quiet, like clandestine phone calls from a few Liberals, the NDP, the Bloc, going, we want to vote for your bill. What can we do to help? And I think that there are people from all political stripes who actually fundamentally understand this, but they need to hear from you. They need to hear from constituents in their riding that are employed in these sectors, that they don't want to hear the industry being used for political posturing on either side of the aisle, right? So this is why I actually just postponed the tabling or the second reading of my bill, because I wanted the temperature to come down a little bit so that we could perhaps build some consensus rather than escalating the tension up, which is often what we saw in the dialogue around the oil sands. So I am optimistic that we'll see that happen. But again, like, it has to come from industry. You have to be speaking with one voice, and you have to use associations like the CBC did to really iron that out. Is that it? We're done? One more, and I won't talk as much. Teamwork. They really are cool. Teamwork. Come on.
Okay, here we go. All right, Eric Krisky, Michelle, nice to see you. We've been trading emails and helping out. Not a question. I wanted to actually add to that. So some of the stuff we're working on with the CBC, and I've been personally trying to help herd the cats. So all y'all that are here, there's a couple of things that are going on. So one, Clea, were you going to speak to this or no? Okay, sorry, maybe I'm still on a bit of thunder. So we have a letter that the CBC has authored in support of this. Please go sign up. Clem, you can tell everybody how best to get at it. The other thing that I've been working on with other members here is to draft templates that people can use to send to their MPs to speak to this stuff, because it's super important. I've been dealing with governments around the world, a lot of people in here have as well. Nobody's figured it out perfectly yet. There's no silver bullet. And the thing, I was crunching some numbers last week, just kind of back of napkin math, looking at, you know, market cap and investment and what's flown into the industry. Canadians have attributed to probably more than 50% of the development and market cap and investable entities in this space. We're talking more than $3 trillion of investment has gone into this space globally. And the amount that's been captured here in Canada is super small. We're talking about people that were critical at some of the early exchanges like Kraken and Coinbase and Gemini and FTX now, and some of the biggest players in the space, some of the biggest, most innovative protocols in the space. All these things were done by Canadians, and we should be really, really proud of that. But we need to rally now to be able to support this stuff. Because if we don't, we might miss a chance to be the leader that we should be. So that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Awesome. I would just maybe just say back to you, it depresses me that you're like, wow, it's not really a priority for the regulators. And it's like this resignation. It should be a priority, right? And it really should. Like the resigned, it's not a priority. I mean, that actually just really makes me disenchanted with things. I would just say I don't think it has to be that way, but it really is. In politics, in legislation, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, so be squeaky, particularly on behalf of your employees, the people who are benefiting from the work that you're doing. I think that's really important, and it'll help us see the sector grow.
Well, that was a phenomenal last panel. I want to thank you guys so much. I know it's been a bit of a long day, but we just have a little bit more to go.